So it's 5:30 in the morning. Why not talk about Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan? Let's get some political philosophy. The Leviathan is going to get published in 1651. 1651, and you know exactly what that means. 1651, right after the English Civil War, you had the Bill of Rights. They got the English Bill of Rights, and then you had Cromwell's instrument of government. So you just had King Charles I got his head chopped off. Whoosh, right? Whoosh. Lop, 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 right? Just to give it a little lop. King Charles I, his head is, rolling around on the ground. And it was a fight with the parliamentarians versus the royalists. And the parliamentarian says, not only are we going to get ourselves a constitution, the instrument of government, Cromwell's instrument of government, but we're also going to get ourselves a Bill of Rights. So how did they get a republic? As soon as they got rid of their monarch. They got rid of their monarch, and then they got a republic, a constitution, and a Bill of Rights. And let's look at what were the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, it was an original act of the English Parliament. It's been in the custody of the Parliament since its creation. It was published in December 1689. And what does the English Bill of Rights say? Can I read this old ass English? Maybe, I don't know. It's in like some kind of cursive. So let's pull it up, huh? Bill of Rights, 1689. So the principal ideas advanced. A man is a group of material particles in motion. So Hobbes isn't just trying to figure out the best kind of government. He's kind of thinking about the science, the prevalent science, the wisdom at the time. He just survived the Civil War, and he's a conservative. So in spite of the Civil War and the parliamentarians winning, Cromwell winning and bringing about a constitution and all these bills of rights, Thomas Hobbes is like lamenting the loss of the king. But King Charles was such a great king. Why did we get rid of King Charles? The Bill of Rights, 1689, Act of Parliament, crucial landmark in English constitutional law. Yeah, they still consider the Bill of Rights and the Magna Carta as like part of the Constitution that they don't fucking have today. And actually, it would be brilliant if the king would institute the Constitution and a Bill of Rights. It'd be fucking brilliant. But I don't think they're smart enough to do that. So in the 1600s, there was renewed interest in the Magna Carta. The Parliament of England passed the Petition of Right. The Petition of Right in 1628, which established certain liberties for subjects. Interesting. Then the Civil War happened, 1642 to 1651. 9 years fought between the king and an oligarchic but elected parliament. So it was just the royalists versus the parliamentarians. The Habeas Corpus Act was passed 1679. The Glorious Revolution is going to happen when Dutch Stadtholder William III of Orange-Nassau, a.k.a. William of Orange, a.k.a. William and Mary of Orange and Purple. The Declaration of Right is passed in the House of Commons, saying that the House cannot answer to the nation of the Prince of Orange till we declare that what the rights are invaded. William cannot take it ill if we make conditions to secure ourselves for the future in order to do justice to those who sent us hither. What I want to know was the goddamn provisions of the motherfucking act. The Declaration of Right was enacted as in an act of Parliament. The Bill of Rights, 1689. It received the royal assent in December 1689. What the fuck is the royal assent? When the monarchy formally approves of it. Wow. Okay. So the act asserted certain... Okay, here, you all ready? Are you ready? Here it is. Protestants may have arms for their defense suitable to the conditions and allows by law. So the right to bear arms. Freedom of speech in debates or proceedings in Parliament ought not to be impeached or questioned in any court place out of Parliament. So parliamentarians had free speech everywhere. people, Protestants, had a right to carry arms for their defense. Protestants. This is the heyday of the Protestant, the peak of the Protestant, liberal Republican thinking. Commission for ecclesiastical causes illegal. Levying taxes without grant of parliament illegal. The pretended power of suspending laws and dispensing with laws by regal authority without consent of parliament is illegal. Keeping a standing army in time of peace, unless it be with the consent of parliament, is against the law. It's the right of the subjects to petition the king, and prosecutions for such petitioning are illegal. Levying taxes without the grant of parliament. Let's see. Promising of fines and forfeitures before conviction are illegal and void. Jurors in trials for high treason ought to be freeholders. Excessive bail ought not to be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. For all redress of all grievances and for the amending, strengthening, and preserving of the laws, parliaments ought to be held frequently. Promises of fines and forfeitures. We'll read some more of this in a second. The state, the great Leviathan, is an artificial man in which sovereignty is the soul, and the officers, the joints, rewards and punishments, the nerves, wealth, its strength, safety, its business, counselors, its memory, equity and law, its reason and will, peace, its health, sedition, its sickness, and civil war, its death. So the state, the great Leviathan, it's an artificial man in which sovereignty is the soul. You know what? The English Civil War made England better, and the American Civil War made America better. So I don't know if Civil War is its death. It's interesting that he's basically saying that the state, the great Leviathan, is a man with a soul and has arms and joints and a head and eyeballs and ears, and just like us. And it's trying to be rich, trying to make money, trying to stay safe in its business. Counselors, its memories, equity, its law, reason and will, peace, its health. Sedition is its sickness. He's just playing with words at this point, I think. The sovereignty is the soul. The soul of the great Leviathan is the sovereignty. So it's unassailable fucking power. The soul of the state is the power of the state. I feel like the soul of the state would be not just the power, but the human power, the human element. Then there would be the land and resources. There's a lot to Colorado. The soul. Well, the soul of Colorado is the sovereignty of Jared Polis. Good old King Jared Polis. Reasoning is the manipulation of names. Truth is the correct ordering of names. Desire is motion toward an object, and aversion is motion away. Interesting. So to Thomas Hobbes, good and bad are understood by reference to desire and aversion. Desire is motion towards an object. Aversion is a motion away. In a state of nature, there is a war of every man against every man. To secure peace, men make contracts establishing a sovereign power who is not subject to civil law, since by his will he creates law. Of the three forms of sovereignty, monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy, monarchy is the most effective in securing peace. Yeah, Thomas Hobbes is a monarchist. He's a royalist. He's a royalist monarchist. So he's a conservative. And that's where I agree on Thomas Hobbes. It should be quite amazing because I'm left wing. But Thomas Hobbes has a whole bunch of freedoms. So he's trying to argue against, the English Bill of Rights and the Cromwell's instrument. He's arguing against the Constitution and a Bill of Rights. To lay down a man's right to anything is to divest himself of liberty. There's a right to contracts. He talks about a right to self-defense. He goes to the state of nature. And the way he defends the state is because the state of nature, all men are just at each other's throat, just attacking each other, trying to rob, and, whatever. Bunch of damn sodomites, right? And so what you have to do with all the damn, sodomites is you need a strong Leviathan to make sure they are acting right, make sure they're behaving correctly, make sure they keep their goddamn hands to themselves. Right is laid aside either by simply renouncing it or by transferring it to another. So he goes on with a whole bunch of crazy ass distinctions, but we have a right to contracts. We have a right to, he calls it a covenant. We have a right to defend ourselves. Here's the first, let's read the first law of nature. So he's got 27 laws or something. But let's just get to the first law of nature. The first law of nature is as follows. And because the condition of man, as hath been declared in the precedent chapter, is a condition of war of everyone against everyone, in which case everyone is governed by his own reason, and there is nothing he can make use of that may not be a help unto him in preserving his life against his enemies. It followeth that in such a condition every man has a right to everything, even to one another's body. And therefore, as long as this natural right of every man to everything endureth, there can be no security to any man, how strong or wise soever he be, of living out the time which nature ordinarily alloweth men to live, and consequently is a precept or a general rule of reason that every man ought to endeavor peace as far as he has hope of obtaining it, and when he cannot obtain it, that he may seek and use all helps and advantages of war. The first branch of which rule containeth the first and fundamental law of nature, which is to seek peace and follow it. The second, the sum of the right of nature, which is by all means we can defend ourselves. So the fundamental law of nature is to seek peace and follow it for as long as possible. So there's a difference between law and rights. Freedoms are what we're allowed to do, and laws are what we're not supposed to do. So he's saying the fundamental law of nature is to not attack people, to not engage in violent, bloody affairs, to seek peace, and to follow it. So this is a conservative who's sitting there saying, King Charles I, we needed his Leviathan, his strength, to be the peacemaker, because he crushes everybody else that maintains peace. And this actually, the first law of self-defense, of maintaining peace for as long as you can, to making sure that violence is the last option, but you do have a right to defend yourself. So I'm not sure how you want to say it. The first law is to seek peace, and then to not war, and then the second law is to defend yourself. So, or the second part of the law, the right of nature. You have the fundamental law of nature and the right of nature. The law of nature is to seek peace and follow it. The right of nature, according to Hobbes, is to, by all means we can, defend ourselves. From this fundamental law of nature, by which men are commanded to endeavor peace, is derived the second law, that a man be willing, when others are so too, as far forth as for peace and defense of himself, he shall think it necessary to lay down this right to all things, and be contented with so much liberty against other men as he would allow other men against himself. For as long as every man holdeth this right of doing anything he liketh, so long are all men in the condition of war. But if other men will not lay down their right as well as he, then there is no reason for anyone to divest himself of his, for that were to expose himself to prey, which no man is bound to, rather than to dispose himself to peace. This is the law of the gospel. Whatsoever you require that others should do to you, that do ye to them. Whatsoever you require that others should do to you, that do ye to them. And that law of all men, quod tibi fieri non vis alteria ni for Cyrus, some Latin bullshit, which means do not do to others what you would not do, what you do not want done to yourself. So basically the same shit, right? Same fucking golden rule. Be nice to others. Don't be mean to others. You don't like it, don't do that to others. You do like it, then do that to others. Simple, easy, logical. So what am I trying to say? The first law of nature is the right to defend ourselves, and the second law of nature is the right to enter into a sovereign government in order to protect our security and our liberties. So that's a huge jump. But I think it actually makes sense. We have a right to defend ourselves. If everybody's fighting against everybody, well, if somebody tries to attack you, got a right to defend yourself. But in the law, in the state of nature, everybody can attack everybody. So, of course, you got a right to defend yourself. But, yeah, I mean, you're in a state of war. So you have to, attack others and plunder. And then, my God, that'll just be a terrible society. That'll be everybody, nobody's working, nobody's creating things, nobody's doing anything. Everybody's just stealing and taking and fighting. And, that'll be awful. And the Leviathan is necessary to make sure that men aren't fighting and tearing each other apart. And then we need to figure out what kind of government do we need. We need a government. It's a necessary evil. But what kind of government do we need? He thinks a monarch is just King Charles I. I sure love King Charles I so much. So the fundamental law of nature, the mutual transferring of right, covenants, contracts. We'll come back to all this. But you have a right to defend yourself. That's the first law of nature. And then the second law of nature is the right to enter into a covenant to create a sovereign government that can secure our liberties, secure our security, and secure our liberties. All right, let's carry on. The Leviathan, or the matter, form, and power of a commonwealth, ecclesiastical and civil, is primarily a treatise on the philosophy of politics. It also contains important discussions, some brief, some extended, on metaphysics, epistemology, psychology, language, ethics, and religion. Hobbes develops his views from metaphysics of materialism and a mechanical analogy in which everything is a particle or set of particles moving in accordance with laws. Though he was at one time secretary to Francis Bacon, English philosopher and essayist, his inspiration came from Galileo Galilei, Italian mathematician and physicist. Hobbes was unusual in being an early empiricist who recognized the importance of mathematics. In the Leviathan, the realism of Niccolo Machiavelli, Florentine man of affairs and political writer, the emphasis on sovereignty of Jean Bodin, French legalist and politician, and the attempt of Hugo Grotius, Dutch jurist, to modernize the conception of natural law by relating it to mathematics and the new science are combined and developed with great originality, clarity, and flair for a pungent statement to constitute one of the masterpieces of political philosophy. Hobbes divides all knowledge into two classes, natural philosophy and civil philosophy. The former is the basis for the latter and consists in turn of two parts. First, philosophy, comprising laws of particular particles in general, such as inertia, causation, and identity, in physics, which deals with the qualities of particles. These particles, singly or in combination, may be permanent or transient, celestial or terrestrial, with or without sense, with or without speech. A man is a group of particles that is permanent, terrestrial, sensible, and loquacious. Physics contains not only optics and music, which are the sciences of vision and hearing in general, but also ethics, which is the science of the passions of men, poetry, rhetoric, logic, and equity. The four last are respectively the study of man's use of speech and elevated expression, and persuading, reasoning, and contracting. Civil philosophy deals with the rights and duties of the sovereign or of subjects. Hobbes makes extensive use of the mechanical model in constructing his system. Life is motion, therefore machines have artificial life. The heart is a spring, the nerves are strings, the joints are wheels, giving motion to the whole body. The commonwealth is an artificial man in which sovereignty is the soul, officers are the joints, rewards and punishments are the nerves, wealth is its strength and safety, its business, counselors its memory, equity, law or reason and will, peace its health, sedition its sickness, civil war its death. The covenants by which it comes into being are the counterpart of the fiat of creation. Let's go back here to the Bill of Rights. By assuming and exercising a power of dispensing with and suspending laws and execution, prosecuting 7 bishops, levying taxes, raising and keeping a standing army, causing Protestants to be disarmed, violating the freedom of election of members to serve him by prosecutions for matters and causes only, employ excessive fines and bails and illegal and cruel punishments, by making several grants and promises So the augmentation in effect, the Bill of Rights was later supplemented by the Act of Settlement 1701, which was agreed to by Parliament of Scotland as part of the Treaty of Union. And it altered the line of succession to the throne laid out in the Bill of Rights. However, both the Bill of Rights and the Claim of Right contributed a great deal to the establishment of the concept of parliamentary sovereignty and the curtailment of the rights of the monarch. Legal status. The Bill of Rights applies in England and Wales. It was enacted in the Kingdom of England, which at the time included Wales. Scotland has its own legislation, the Claim of Right Act. So, wow, in England, you can carry a gun, theoretically speaking, because you got the English Bill of Rights, right? The good old English Bill. Hey, we're Protestants here. The damn Catholics, you can't trust them. You got to have a gun. Nah, the Protestant, we Protestants we got to arm up. No, the damn Catholics, you know how they are. They're a bunch of terrorists, right-wing terrorists. They just align themselves with a bunch of right-wing governments and pretend, they trick them into pretending like they're the pretend king or something. I don't know. Like the one's a god and one's a king. Well, you're the one that's closest to God and I'm the one that's closest to a king. But really, they're just two fucking assholes. So no, unusual, cruel and unusual punishments, no excessive bail and fines. Freedom of speech is mentioned. Elections are mentioned. The petitions are mentioned. Standing armies. We never banned a standing army, which is interesting because we question standing armies. And why do we question standing armies? Because, why do we raise an army? Just to stand around? No, you're going to want to get that damn army to do something. So if you just have a standing army during a time of peace, that doesn't make any sense because you might pretend that you're prepared for war, but nobody's attacking you. No, you got a standing army because you want to invade other people. You want to attack other people. So, freedom of speech, right to bear arms, no standing armies, the right to petition. Freedom of speech was just for the parliamentarians, but the idea, right? If the parliamentarians who's supposed to represent the people can have free speech. So that's a little bit of the Bill of Rights. He's all pissed off about he's like, hey, all we got is a right to, defend ourselves, really, and whatever rights the king gives us. These damn Bills of rights to bear arms. Can everybody calm down? Can everybody just calm down for a second? You love King Charles I, don't you damn royalist? Let's see here. In a civil state, he talks about whenever men are coming for peace, whenever they're a peace envoy, then they are to be allowed through. The fourth law of nature is gratitude. The fifth law of nature is mutual accommodation or complaisance. The 11th, equity. The 10th, arrogance or against arrogance. So let me just read one of these freedoms. On this law dependeth another, that at the entrance into the conditions of peace, no man required to reserve to himself any right which is not content should be reserved to every one of the rest. That's brilliant, right? So if we're going to sit down at a table, then I have a right to a chair and you have a right to a chair. And if some reason you're saying, no, I have a right to a chair, but you must stand. I get to sit in a throne, but you got to stand in the galley down beneath me. Do not negotiate with that person. That person is right from the beginning. It is, as it is necessary, for all men that seek peace to lay down certain rights of nature, that is to say, not to have liberty to do all they list, so is it necessary for man's life to retain some as right to govern their own bodies, right to enjoy air, water, motion, ways to go from place to place, and all things else without which a man cannot live or not live well. If in this case at the making of peace men require for themselves that which they would not have to be granted to others, they do contrary to the precedent law that commandeth the acknowledgement of natural equality, and therefore also against the law of nature. The observers of this law are those we call modest, and the breakers arrogant men. The Greeks call the violation of this law pleonexia, that is, a desire of more than their share. Also, if a man be trusted to judge between a man and a man, It's a precept of the law of nature that he deal equally between them. For without that, the controversies of men cannot be determined but by war. He therefore that is partial in judgment doth what in him lies to determine from the use of judges and arbitrators, and consequently against the fundamental law of nature is the cause of war. So just to go back to the one up here, he mentioned several things. We have a right to govern our own bodies, which means we have a right to enjoy air and water, motion, and ways to go from place to place, transportation, and all the other things that a man cannot live and not live well. So he's sitting there saying we have a right to food, water, shelter, right? Air, water, motion, transportation are the three things he mentions. But then he goes and says all the other things that man needs, and not just needs, but needs to live well, to live, comfortably. There's a seventh law that in revenges, that is retribution of evil for evil, men look not at the greatness of the evil past, but of the greatness of the good to follow. That's brilliant. I mean, that's so fucking progressive. So he's got a lot of great ideas. What I think he tried to do with these natural laws was basically say, oh, you got your Bill of Rights, Protestants? Well, we got our Bill of Rights too. And so what we have is a competition, right? Just a battle of the banjos here. A competition of who's got the better Bill of Rights. And so I think that the conservatives should, royalists should hold Hobbes up, because he's sitting there saying we have a right to contracts, we have a right to, let's see, what else? A right to contract, a right to self-defense. We don't even have a right to self-defense in the U.S., Bill of Rights. So in some respects, Hobbes' Bill of Rights adds a couple freedoms that we hadn't thought about, or the Protestants, the parliamentary. I would have been on the side of the parliamentarians. I would have been on the side of the Cromwells. So when he's talking about being a progressive, right, when it comes to revenges is what he's talking about, justice, when it comes to, civil justice, what you have to do when you punish a person, yeah, you're real mad and you want to hurt them real bad just because you're so pissed off and you want to hurt them and show them, but ultimately you want to, look at the greatness of the good to follow, not of the, greatness of the evil past, but of the good to follow. So, okay, you'll punish him to do this, do that. But once he's done with the punishment, then we all come together, sing Kumbaya, and look at us. Now we're all singing Kumbaya, right? That sounds like a great society to me. You want to come over and sing Kumbaya? Fucking A, I do. You're goddamn... How did you know? How did you know? Kumbaya, my Lord. Kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord. Kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord. Kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord. Kumbaya. The sixth law of nature is that upon caution of a future time, a man ought to pardon the offenses past to them that repenting desire it. So he's saying, forgive people. So I'm not. He's called these rights. I don't. There's. I don't. There's the criminal code. Thou shalt not do these things, and then the freedoms is thou shalt do these things. And so when I think about a criminal mindset, if they would just get into, I don't know, how do you get laws into a criminal, ignorant, dumbass, fucking backwards piece of shit? Because the idea of the laws is that they're passing it in the legislature and we're all talking about it, and we all know the Constitution because we're Americans. I mean, how can you not know the Constitution and live in America, right? And then we're quizzing each other so that way we know the Constitution like the back of our hand, and we know all of our bills of rights and our freedoms. And the reason why I mention all this, because if you're just a criminal piece of shit and you're like, man, that person over there really pisses me off. If you think about the freedoms that you're allowed to have, and think about in the context of the law, so a right to petition, right? Well, you know what? I'm going to get everybody to petition, and we're going to turn this petition. You can turn it into the person that you just have, it's not you. It's your hygiene. So we all got a petition. We want you to take a bath. The whole neighborhood, the whole county, the whole state has signed the petition. There's 100 signatures here. You stink. And you stinking and stinking up the damn... So... What? Hobbes extended the mechanical model in his discussion of the passions. Further laws of nature subordinate to the first three are special cases. Hobbes develops his political theory proper to the terms of the time-honored concepts of equality, the state of nature, natural law, natural rights, contract, sovereignty, and justice. In his hands, however, they receive treatment that is very different from his predecessors, the Greeks, St. Thomas Aquinas, Jean Bodin, and Hugo Grotius, as well as from his successors, John Locke, English philosopher, and his followers in the liberal tradition. Machiavelli's views on egoism and the need for absolute power and the sovereign anticipated Hobbes, but were not worked out in detail as a general political philosophy. In their natural state, according to Hobbes, men are approximately equal in strength, mental capacity, and experience, and everyone has an equal right to everything. If they were without government, the conflict arising from their desires, their distrust, and ambition would lead to a state of war of every man against every man. In it, there would be no property, no justice or injustice, and life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Fortunately, both passion in the form of fear of death, desire for a long and reasonably pleasant life, and hope of achieving it, and reason in the form of knowledge of the articles of peace in the form of the laws of nature, combine to provide a basis for the establishment of civil society and escape from universal strife. The first law of nature is to seek the peace and follow it. The second, a necessary means to the first, is that a man be willing, when others are so too, as far forth as for peace and defense of himself he shall think it necessary, to lay down this natural right to all things, and be contented with so much liberty against other men as he would allow other men against himself. This is to be done by making contracts with others. A necessary condition for the operation of the second law of nature is that men perform their contracts, which is the third law of nature. For contracts to be valid, it is necessary in turn that a sovereign power be established who will make it more painful to commit injustice, which is the breaking of a contract, than to live justly, which is the keeping of the contract. Okay, so he explained that way better than me. He's right? I was kind of wrong. So the first thing is the first law of nature: pursue peace. You have a right to defend yourself. Pursue peace and then defend yourself. The second law of nature is that you should be contented with making an agreement with others. You should have a contract with others. I agree to something, you agree to something, then we should fulfill contracts. Now, if you don't fulfill a contract, because we're in a state of, nature, right? So the third law of nature is this: you need a sovereign, an all-powerful sovereignty, an all-powerful Leviathan. Why? To enforce the contracts that men make with each other. So we don't just have a right to contract, but contracting is like the main fucking thing. And that is like, if two men, two human beings, two people, adults, get together and make an agreement, you do A, B, and C in exchange for, D, E, and F, and you don't fulfill that obligation. There was in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, he ripped it up and then he ate it. Well, I ate the contract, so therefore we never had an agreement. If that's all people had to do. But that's what he's saying. We need a Leviathan. We need a government to make sure that men aren't lying to each other and taking advantage. Hey! What are you doing that for? Let's see here. And then that's to get justice, right? So first law, self-defense. Second law, the right to contract. Third law, a sovereign to make sure you enforce. An all-powerful sovereign to make sure you enforce. That contract that you made with your neighbor. Contracts without the sword, Hobbes reminds us, are only words which guarantee no security. The first three laws of nature, then combined with the nature of man as a complex set of particles, moving in accordance with various set of laws, not only strictly mechanical laws, but also what might be called egoistic and hedonistic laws, are the source of society, sovereignty, and justice. So let's just read one more paragraph here. More specifically, the sovereign must have the power to censor all expression of opinion, to allocate private property, to determine what is good or evil, lawful or unlawful, to judge all cases, to make war or peace, to choose the officers of the Commonwealth, to administer rewards and punishment, to decide all moral or religious questions, and to prescribe how God is to be worshipped. There are, says Hobbes, only three forms which sovereignty may take: monarchy, aristocracy, democracy. Tyranny, interest of the monarch. The essential mark of a Christian is obedience to God's law. God's authority as lawgiver derives from his power. His laws, which are the natural laws, are promulgated by natural reason, revelation, and prophecy. Resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. In the first two parts of the Leviathan, knowledge of natural laws and their implications have been found out by reason. Laws are therefore only conditional theorems. To be shown to be unconditional laws, they must be shown to be the will of God. In fact, Hobbes argues, used an extensive quotation and acute, though one-sided analysis of terms in Scripture and in common speech. All theorems of reasoning about the conduct of men seeking happiness and peace are to be found in Scripture. He concludes that there's no difference between natural law known by reason and revealed or prophetic law. What is law, therefore, depends upon what is Scripture. Scripture, Hobbes argues, again with extensive quotation, analysis, and interpretation, is what is accepted as Scripture in a commonwealth and is nothing apart from its interpretation. If it is interpreted by conscience, we have competition and a return to the state of nature with its war made fiercer by religious conviction and self-righteousness. All the same arguments for commonwealth apply, in particular, therefore, more strongly to the generation of a Christian commonwealth. This is a civil society of Christian subjects under a Christian sovereign. There is no question of opposition between church and state because there is no distinction between them. There are not two laws, ecclesiastical and civil, only civil laws. There is no universal church, since there is no power on earth to which all commonwealths are subject. Consequently, obedience to civil laws is necessary for man's admission into heaven. Even if a sovereign is not Christian, it is still an obligation in law for a Christian to obey him, since those who do not obey break the laws of God. When these truths are obfuscated by misinterpretation of Scripture, there are flaws in Hobbes' philosophy. He is often crude in his vigor, achieving a logical solution of a problem, omitting recalcitrant. Cromwell, Charles II, Puritans, Cavaliers, Jeremy Bentham, Richard Cumberland, Lord Shaftesbury, Cambridge, Platonist, English, Francis Hutcheson. And that's it. That's it. Leviathan.